excited by sympathy, by philanthropy, by collaboration, cooperation, and their existence, our existence, not only in our human Homo sapien communities, but even within our environment, is built on reciprocity in different components of the system. And reciprocity operates on the principle of cooperation, not competition. And environmental integrity, scientists tell us, requires reciprocity and the balance of different species. Likewise, in other parts of the system. So in essence, and this is part of the really a major component of the underpin of FutureNEXT, and I don't want to get excited by it because I can babble on for hours on this, but the key point is we have now reached a point that instead of in a way unconsciously following a doctrine that competition is critical, winner takes it all, and if you don't take it, therefore you have failed, we need to define success and failure very differently, coherent and consistent with our inner feelings and inner values. And if we go to that, we then have to come out with it as part of this new system, a different balance between where competition is productive and necessary, as well as where collaboration and the focus on cooperation is equally productive. So it's not about either or, it's about getting the balance right and getting a coherence between what inside we value and we appreciate and makes us inspired and excited, as well as taking it to our outer society, to our workplace, to our economic system, to our political system, and to broadly the socio-economic system. And getting that balance right is central to the invention of the new system, if you like.
And I'm going to move on to some of these kind of how do you get better questions about the future just now. But one of the things that strikes me, John, just listening to you there talking about abundance, I don't know if you know the work that Bill Sharp has done in the UK, but he writes about the fact that actually when you look at ecological systems, they don't go chasing scarcity, they go chasing abundance. And that's actually one of the problems of having had economics as such a dominant discipline in kind of policy and political terms for so long, as we've sort of lost sight of that in our kind of the way that we organize our societies. So one of the things I was quite excited about here was some of this language, which is also in this part of the book, which is just getting to better questions. I think I've got a feeling, John, that this is kind of very much your handiwork, because you talk about the problems of why questions sort of always taking you back into the past, whereas how questions take you off into the future. And I thought that was really quite a lot of fun and quite a kind of liberating moment for me when I was reading the book. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about sort of that as a kind of an operating principle for thinking about the future and indeed changing the future as well.
Yeah, great question. I think that our default as human beings is to find comfort zones. We're continuously seeking comfort zones without realizing it. And these comfort zones, whenever they are shaken, we get irritable, we get frustrated, and we want to take them back to a comfort zone as quickly as possible. And so the question of why this is happening to me, because it's taking me out of my comfort zone, becomes a natural process that we follow as a society, not even in our individual capacities. Many societies want things to be as stable as possible. But the truth is there isn't that opportunity. And the mindset around growth mindset or anti-fragility, these two terms that have become so famous over the last few years, really are only describing one thing, is how do you enjoy a challenge? How do you change your brain neuroscience to actually think of challenges as something fantastic, something that makes you fitter as you're going along? And the growth mindset ideology from Carol Dweck explains this idea where students that were doing art, loved doing art, but all of a sudden started getting gold. Sorry, there's a dog right here next to me. That scared me. They get gold stars for doing the art. And when they started getting the gold stars taken away, they immediately stopped love doing art. Why? Because we are so conditioned to work towards a goal. And if that condition and that goal gets taken away or gets shaken up, we get upset and we say, why has this happened to us? The question should be is, how do we enjoy more challenge, and how does that challenge make us stronger, fitter, and more adaptable? And ultimately, the world we're moving into requires adaptability, and adaptability is a brain state. It's a action state. It's a attitude. And that question, moving from why is this happening to how do we make it better, is a simple way to reframe it for ourselves.
It sounds like we're beginning to touch on that whole sort of section at the front of the book, so I should probably move us on to that. But I'm just curious, Iraj, because, again, looking at your background as a kind of, a sort of academic economist, economics is full of those sorts of why questions. And I'm just wondering how you found that kind of sort of slight change in mindset towards how when you were working with John. Was it liberating, or was it a bit of a challenge for you?
It was really very exciting for me. It's and the exciting part went beyond liberating. It was a bit of confirmation and affirmation for myself, because over the past 10 years, I've been doing it in an academic way without being told the way John tells the story of liberating me. I thought I'm just being an outlier, always challenging my colleagues in seminars and in papers and in newspapers, etc., okay, why is important, but let's look at how we can fix it. Whereas John's perspective, yes, it not only liberated, but also illuminated what I was trying to do. And that helped me to go from sort of feeling as if I'm the odd one out to say, no, possibly that's the way to go. And I went full speed. And I find it very exciting that if we all in our personal, as well as family, as well as workplace, as well as broader society, start not to stop asking why, but stop worrying too much about why. On a scale of 0 to 100, put 15 or maximum 20 on why, and put 80 of it on how. And if we say we don't like the economy the way it is, then yeah, I know why it got here, but I like to know how to take it to where I like to be. I know why our family ended up here. That's right, I don't like it, but how do we take it to where we would want to be, and so on and so forth. And that how unlocks the creative, embedded creative spirit of human beings, because that's what we are. What has brought us to wherever we have as Homo sapiens is because we've always asked how can I fly? Then helicopters come in. How can I heal the sick? Medicine comes up. How can I run faster? Automobile comes about, and so on and so forth. But if people sat down and said, why we can't fly, why we can't do it, and stuck on the why side without graduating to the how side, we do not make progress. So yes, it was very, very exciting, and I'm really still excited by it.
That's good. Let me move on to this part one of this book. I mean, it's a bit shorter than this section we've just been talking about, and it starts. I think this starts with this quote, which is about wisdom is for the brave. You also talk in here about the loss of future memories, and I kind of got the sense when I was reading it that this was almost like a sort of a kind of warm-up manual, if you like. It was sort of trying to get people into the right frame of mind to read the rest of the book. I mean, is that how it was intended?
Absolutely. I wrote that first part of the book when COVID happened, the first few weeks of COVID. I think what happened to me personally is I was living between London and Dubai. My career was in full flight. I had signed some of the biggest contracts of my life, and within 2 or 3 days, everything got cancelled. I moved from Dubai to Kloof, which is a small farming town in the northern parts of South Africa. And my whole life got rocked. And I went from a very high-flying, jet-setting life to being a farmer for the next 4 months, which was an emotional hit for me. And so I started writing that first part of the book very much based on what tool sets I could use to make myself feel more optimistic, create more creative energy. And so really those 8 tool sets we've shared there are very much based on us getting the right mental state an emotional state in order to be able to deal with such a calamity and such a uncertain world that we started to move towards. So the first one, for example, is mourning our future memories, which is something that many of us don't think about as memories being from something in the future, but actually memories don't have time attached to them. Memories are things that are both future and past and are actually subjective. They're not objective at all. None of our memories are true. They're just something we've held on to create our identity. So letting go of those becomes an incredibly challenging process, but just to become aware that you can and you can change them, whether they're memories from our past or the future, is of paramount importance in getting ready for such deep uncertainty.
And you talk in that, I mean, you've actually just run through it here, but, you know, effectively there's a little bit of a personal guide in here, which is, you know, there's some emotional sort of work here, there's some mental work, some physical work, maybe going back to head, heart and hands again, I'm not sure.
Sure.
And what you talk about is that you do some of this practice 20 minutes twice a day, which you say in the book doesn't feel that much of a commitment, but it felt like quite a commitment to me. So I'm just curious about what you're actually doing when you're going through those kinds of 20-minute workouts.
So we break down this idea of your state is who you are. Your state is how you perceive the world. How you perceive the world is how you prepare for the world. And what we have within us as human beings is three states. We have emotional state, mental state, and physical state. Now, if any one of those is out of sorts, we are just not our best selves. And we understand that in times of crisis, we need to be at optimum levels of perspective of mental state, emotional state, and physical state. So in the book, I share my own practice of morning meditation and prayers, morning workouts, and morning mental state processes to get myself into the state of being okay with challenges. And so what I do is, if you're wanting to know the physical side of it, it's really just stretching and body work, cycling sometimes. And really remember that when I wrote that in lockdown, there wasn't access to gyms or anything like that. There really was homework that I was doing. But I think the most important thing there is for us to have the right emotional state. Now, the thing that happens to most human beings is we have anxiousness as a default. And our bodies have become habituatized to anxiousness. It's become a habit. And so our body becomes our mind. Our body reacts to these uncertain times in an immediate state of anxiousness rather than in a state of calm and elegance. And so the first thing I do in the mornings, I follow a gentleman by the name of Dr. Joe Dispenza, who's a neuroscientist that puts out some incredible meditations. And I wake up half an hour before I'm supposed to wake up, and I do half an hour of meditation based on his meditations that are very much about making yourself feel more whole, more loving, more opportunity, more grateful. And when you put yourself into that emotional state for the day, you start to realize that, Andrew, it becomes an easy thing to decide on. Because you know that a little bit of anxiousness waking up at 6:30 becomes a monster by 11 o'clock. And by 3:30 p.m., you've had the worst day of your life and you just don't want life to carry on. But all you really had to do is understand that emotional management is very much like fitness for your physical body. If you're going for a run and you're running out of air, it's because you're not fit enough. Now, if you're defaulting to anxiousness, you're just not emotionally fit. And so there's practices which have to be done daily, because that's how we are as human beings, is necessary to put ourselves into a state of opportunity, wholeness, and optimism to deal with this uncertainty.
So let me just kind of make sure I'm understanding that right, John. What you're saying is that these kind of exercises, these emotional, mental, and physical exercises, are about allowing you to see uncertainty and not actually freeze up in the face of it. It actually see uncertainty as a kind of an open opportunity, or with an openness rather than as a problem.
You see, as human beings, our default button is if something's uncertain and you don't know much about it, what do? You panic. Most people panic because it's flight or fright, or am I fighting? Am I running away? Am I frozen? And we can see that most of the world is going through such deep mental states of anguish. I mean, you try and get into a psychologist's room now, they're backed up. Look at how many divorces are happening, how many breakdowns are happening. This is because our emotional states and old traumas are coming to the surface. Not just in our individual beings, but on a societal state. We can see Black Lives Matter, and all these things are just old emotional trauma that's coming to the surface. And so just in our own states, we have these traumas coming up. Now, if you're not managing them, you're obviously going to get a state of panic and anxiousness. And so really that part of the book, Future Now, is what you do in the now determines your ability to reimagine and to take action with so much uncertainty around us. I think we use a line in there, which is not our line. It's a great line. It says, when nothing is certain, anything is possible. Only anything is possible when you've got the right mindset.
I think I'm going to move on to some of the kind of future next bit of the book in a minute, but I think you also recommend turning off your news feeds as well.
Yes, I think that part of it was also in the first part, is that understanding that if you are stuck on the news cycle, you realize that the news cycle are precision scientists on creating three emotions in us: feeling sorry for ourselves, feeling sorry for somebody else, or feeling angry with the world. Those are the only three things you get when you get away from a news cycle. You hardly get any other emotion. Now, if you're addicted to the news cycle, what you are actually addicted to is the drama triangle. And we break that down in the book. The drama triangle creates those three emotions. And so what we do is we look for other places to give us that opportunity to go back into our drama triangle and get stuck in our drama triangle. And we all know that no creativity, no reimagination, and no collaboration comes from a drama triangle. It always comes from a creator triangle. And so try and cut out any gossiping, any access to anxious news on a continuous basis, and give yourself 5 minutes in the morning, catch up. Give yourself another 5 minutes in the evening and catch up, and try not to communicate about it continuously, because we know the best thing to do is to get around the coffee table and just start moaning and sharing deep sorrow stories, which really don't help anybody. It's more of an addiction.
I'm going to come on to the future next, just to finish the conversation with you and Iraj. Probably going to come to you next, Iraj, because I realize John's been talking for quite a long time there, because I think that was very much his sort of section of the book. But I'm also just going to observe, we've got about 15 minutes left before we close. It would be nice to get some questions. I think Miriam in Mexico has says that to improve our future, we need to improve the education system in Mexico. I've seen that in the chat. I might invite her to expand on that. But so if you have got questions which are coming to mind as a result of the conversation so far, please do pop them in, and so we can sort of get some of that kind of sense of questions which are in your minds as you're listening to this conversation. So let's move on to Future Next, and the Future Next section's kind of a bit of a shopping list, if you like. It's a sort of a bit of some recommendations. You've kind of sort of put a lot of people into into boxes here, if you like. You know, you've got a group of you've got recommendations for employees, for employers, for entrepreneurs, for executives, policymakers, and consumers. Let me just start with businesses. I mean, either as rather than go through that whole list, rather than as employees or employers, what are the sorts of things? Maybe this is a point for Iraj to come in, I'm not sure. What are the sorts of things that businesses should be doing now in the kind of current setting, as they're trying to wrestle with coming back from the pandemic and trying to construct a new sort of model?
I think the key issue for the businesses, as we argue in the book, is to see themselves as part of this broader systems where they have responsibilities. In a lot of what earlier on I referred to embedded pandemics in the system, be it, for example, inequality of pay for men and women, be it excessive wage disparity or remuneration disparity between the lowest and the highest paid. All those pandemics are really solvable by business. Business has got to become part of the solution, not sit down and say, well, government must do it. We obey the law, we follow, we comply with this. This is the best practice, and all the jargons that we hear. Businesses need to acknowledge that they have a critical role in dealing with some of the systemic issues that if we don't deal with them, we will be collectively vulnerable. On the environment, for example, on bringing better income inequality, even I would say bringing some of the issues that John referred to, and in your previous discussion, talking about bringing harmony between different aspects of us, emotionally, intellectually, etc. We spend a lot of our time, each one of us, in some or other business. We can't be something at home and something else in business. So business needs to reinvent itself to be, in a way, conducive to living a consistent life. And so there's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of literature over the past 3 decades about the nature of the firm and how firms have got to go from single bottom line to multiple bottom line. We argue that we now have come to a point where we have to even go beyond multiple bottom line, but pay attention to how do we run the business to get into the bottom line. It's not about that profit is good, but how you make the profit. It's not that you got to treat people as human beings and bring equality of rights of men and women to the workplace, or diversity of different people, but how you bring it about. The consultative process through which you achieve the bottom lines become as important for the nature of the firm as making profit. So those are some of the issues that we raise in the book. But very importantly, Andrew, in that part of the book, generally, we say, look, these are not the be end and on end all over. We don't have a comprehensive list, but we're inviting everybody to be part of finding a menu of questions that we all have to deal with. So this is more like an invitation list. Indicatively, these are the type of questions that we ask. If we got it wrong, add to it. I'd love to learn from you. And we inviting everybody to join the revolution, so to speak.
And one of the things. Sorry, John.
Yeah. Can I just jump in there? Sorry, Andrew. I think the key there, and the reason we wanted to break it down into citizen, employee, employer, entrepreneur, policymaker, and business owner, was that we wanted everybody to understand that you need to be part of the process of creating something new. I think that many people in the world feel helpless. They are victims of the reality they are in. They're continuously obeying politicians and economics, and they never really take a stand. And so our reasoning to break it down like that, and you might even see that some of the conversation starter points, they are similar. And it's just that saying, look, as a citizen, you're an activist. And the decisions you make as a consumer, as an employee, as an employer, are all pointing towards the world that you're creating. So if you're being unconscious, unaware, or not wanting to take responsibility, don't sit on the sidelines and blame, shame, and point fingers. And that's ultimately why we wanted to break it down into those.
Okay, that makes sense. I was going to say, in response to what Iraj was just saying, that the sort of increasing amounts of evidence which suggests that businesses which focus on value and not price, and on cooperation and not competition, are kind of more profitable and also grow more quickly than other businesses as well. So there's, this isn't just, there's one of the problems with these conversations, especially given the business culture we've come out of, is that there's a kind of a residue of business thinking, which is, gosh, it's this or that, where actually it's not. It's actually and. I'm kind of interested in policymakers here, partly because I've just been listening actually this morning to a podcast with Mark Blythe who co-wrote Angrynomics, and he was talking, and he's sort of fairly committed to relatively radical economic change. I think Iraj and him would have a good conversation. But what he was talking about in the podcast is that there's a world in the head of policymakers, and there's a world which is actually the world of the emerging evidence in this kind of new economic environment. And unfortunately, they're a long way apart. So actually, a lot of the evidence suggests that, we should be doing things like, giving poor people money seems to work quite well in terms of helping them escape from poverty, for example. Vancouver's just done an experiment on homeless people where they gave them $5,000 and a lot of them got out of homelessness, who'd have thought it, for example. But actually policymakers have still got a whole lot of kind of, if you like, 1980s thinking or 1950s thinking in their heads. So this idea comes across the table and they say, no, we can't possibly do that. The whole idea of, public debt being a big problem and nations having credit cards is kind of another example of that. It sits there in the kind of policy making head, even though the economic evidence suggests something completely different. So I'm kind of just curious as how, you know, in terms of when you're talking to policymakers about this, how do you actually manage to break that sort of gap, or break that sort of gap between the kind of policy ideas in their heads, which is, you know, probably going back to where we started, an old future fairy tale, which they should have jumped by now, and actually getting them into this space where they're sort of engaging with the actual existing future.
Yeah, I think, Andrew, that's such an important point, especially in my half of my life where I'm a policy activist and policy advisor. And I keep saying history doesn't matter. Don't listen only to the experts, because a lot of people are living to today's reality, whereas policy advice comes from a history from 20 years ago. The book was written, published, evaluated, etc., which is the origin of this, what is in the jargon of policymaking, there is a lag between evidence and policy. And we need to break that. And in order to get rid of that lag, is we got to, in a way, debunk this idea that experts are the only one who are got monopoly over wisdom. No, maybe if we get a bunch of random people, 200 of them in a room, they will give you current wisdom, current solution, as opposed to what somebody researched 20, 30, 40 years ago. So my advice to the policymakers is that, look, I know certain things, these are my principles, but if you want to deal with today's suffering of people, let's get a cross-section of people and ask them what are the solutions. And then I will sit down together with others and say, are these solutions doable? How do we do them? Not why we shouldn't do them. And again, it comes back to the question of how that we raise in the other part of the book. My emphasis in policymaking is let's focus on how, as opposed to why, which is the culture of policymaking. It's institutionalized lag. And my advice to them is, with due respect to wisdom, a lot of it is irrelevant for the challenges that we face today.
Okay, that's a good note. I'm going to invite a couple of comments. So we're going to finish at the hour. We've got 2 or 3 comments. I'm going to invite a couple of people to come in a moment. Miriam, I'm just going to ask you in a moment to speak to the point about the educational system. Barbara, I'm going to ask you to speak to your point about reaching out. While anybody, I've probably got time for 3 questions before we close. While people are just thinking about that, while we've got a third person just thinking if they're going to come in or not, how do people get hold of the book, John?
The book is available on Amazon. Seeing that most people here are international, Amazon has got it both on Kindle and print on demand, so it's available internationally. We haven't recorded the Audible as yet, but in South Africa, it's available at all the bookstores. We are still looking to do a deal with a publisher internationally for it. So for the moment, Amazon is really the only place to go for it.
So they're just going to go and look for FutureNEXT by John Sanei and Iraj Abedian, and up it will pop. Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take the risk here of inviting Miriam to come off mute, if you might, Miriam, and just talk your question about the education system, or your observation about the education system, because I know we haven't talked about education at all. Yeah, Miriam de Carmen Saavedra. Do you want to come off mute, Miriam? Perhaps she's not there. Let me ask a question in a different way in that case. I mean, actually, we haven't talked about the education system, and that may be because the education system is quite a slow-moving beast. I'm not quite sure. How do you see the education system fitting into this?
Well, the central education system is what basically socializes our mind or conditions our mind. And part of this systemic change, or the new system that we're suggesting we should find, is about education. But education itself has to also be split into different components, because we talk about education system, but a lot of important part of education success in a broad terms is what happens before kids come to school. in the first 3 to 5 years of our life. So we need to redefine education. We need to re-understand and reimagine the way we would support mothers as the first educators to be fit for purpose, so to speak, beyond the emotions, which is natural. We need to really unpack this fundamental part of our social life in a very, very structured way. And fortunately, science has generated more than enough evidence to equip us how to do it. But what we cannot do is to keep the current system in place for some or other reason.
Okay, thank you for that. Barbara Carr, if you would like to come off mute, I think you're talking about the need for a strategy. Let me just get that point on my screen. We need to have a strategy on how we're going to reach out and make the journey to a positive outcome under ethical principles. Do you want to just come off mute and expand on that, Barbara, if you're listening?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you. I think the topic is timely, and I do think that you made a great point about not getting so caught up in the why and start thinking about the how, because we do want people to be more purposeful in what they do and how they act. And I guess more than anything, just wanted to point out that the way that we enact our how should fall under some ethical behaviors. And I just feel like right now we're starting to see a lot of people who are maybe falling outside of what should be done, and it makes me nervous. So I really appreciate the conversation about what really matters, and it's more than just your shareholder, but it's your stakeholders throughout your community. And so again, thanks so much for the conversation.
And thank you very much indeed, Barbara. And Jim Maltby, you have a question about organizational and institutional change, which we might want to just pop into the discussion as well, if you want to come off mute, Jim. If you're there. Perhaps he's not equipped to do that. So we've also got this question about how do you change organization and institutions. That seems quite a good point to end, actually, to be honest. I was going to ask you about how optimistic you were, but let's ask this. Let's end on this one as well. How do you change organizations, institutions in the kind of time that we've got? And time is urgent on all of these issues, I think.
I think there's two ways to come at this. We must realize that institutions are made up of people. And what happens when we wake up and we become more conscious and we start becoming more empathetic activists in the way we have the actions that we have, the decisions we make inside institutions, ultimately do have a domino effect. And then as consumers, which institutions are you buying from? Who are you supporting? And what are you engaging with? And if you can attack it from both sides, both from the consumer's point of view, as well as from an executive point of view. And we're starting to see many companies right now, like the Facebook employees not wanting to work for Facebook because of what was going on in as far as the politics were concerned. That's becoming an activist in your role as a conscious citizen. So the question is valid, but also remember, if you break it down to first principles, all institutions are made up of people. And as a consumer, you very much have a voice that's louder than it's ever been before because of our microphone of social media. But also you have a very active part to be able to make better decisions inside those organizations. And one by one, slowly but slowly, we will start chipping away. And already we're starting to see people chip away at this old institutions.
Iraj, have you got thoughts on that?
Yeah, just a supplement to that. What is not sustainable, it's bound to disintegrate and become passé, as they say. So what we need to do is to focus on the new system, and every system has got three protagonists: the individuals, the institutions, and the community. And we got to focus on those three protagonists differently. Some of us, like as John mentioned, very excited and capable on focusing on the individual transformation. Absolutely necessary. But at the same time, others of us focus on the changing nature of institution. How do we change business? How do we change governance? How do we change regulation and oversight? And then the third part is very significant, is how do we take a human community, create a critical mass that would take us from disinterested, skeptical, and in a way disruptive, to a community that is more empathetic, more philanthropic, and becomes more trusting. Those three will take time to do, but unless we start today, we won't see the results in time to come.
And I just, that's a good point to close. I'm just seeing a comment from my colleague, Tanya Hishut in South Africa, who says everybody is being or becoming an activist. I love it. And perhaps that is a kind of a theme of the book as well.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say thank you to all of you for joining the webinar this evening. I'm going to say thank you to Tori here and the Persian Educational Foundation for making the opportunity available for the conversation. I'm also just going to say thank you to our guests, John Sanei and Iraj Abedian, for that kind of great discussion. You can, I don't know how we applaud on Zoom anymore. I don't know whether people go off mute and climb or whether they just put their happy hand sign up. But anyway, just if you do want to pick up the book, it's FutureNEXT. You can find it on Amazon and probably lots of less rapacious international book-selling organizations as well. So thank you very much indeed for joining the conversation this evening. Goodbye.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
And thank you, Andrew, for accepting to facilitate this webinar. We're grateful to you and to School of International Futures for joining us for this webinar. Likewise, Persia Educational Foundation is grateful to Iraj and John for joining us, for sharing the insights from their research and their recent book about this important and timely subject. Just wanted to add in conclusion that, of course, education is perhaps the most fundamental system that is being redesigned, and its redesign is being expedited as a result of the pandemic. At Persia, we're watching this transformation and change quite closely. We're firm believers in power of technology in making education accessible to everyone. But at the same time, we know that ultimately the most important resource in making all these systems work and change is human resources. And the point that we ended on, which your colleague Andrew commented on, about becoming activists is quite relevant. It is founded on education, and it adds to the agency that is necessary on the part of every single individual to ensure that the changes that are happening individually, community-wise, and institutionally are moving in the right direction. Because we have all sorts of change, but what we need is creative and resilient change so that we reach a destination that ultimately helps to increase welfare and happiness as one of the most important indicators for progress collectively and individually. So with those thoughts in mind, thank you again for taking part in this webinar. A link to the book was made available on Persia social media originally months ago when it was first announced, and we'll make sure that the Amazon link also goes up on our social media and is available to everyone who follows this recording. It's being shared on Facebook as we're going through the webinar, and we'll make sure that it also is shared on other forms of Persia and hopefully SOIF's social media as well. With much gratitude for your time and insights. Thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to welcoming you to future Persia events and wish you a wonderful weekend wherever you may be around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.